Perfect. Cool.
The live
So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session of Kampung Chats. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that Singapore loves, food. But of course, because it's the Green Collective, we will be talking about food and the sustainable side of food. So, we have two of our brands, as we call them, kakis, with us today, and we'll be discussing food new versus old. And for people who are joining for the first time, we are basically Green Collective Singapore, and we are a collective of sustainable brands. What we do through these webinars is we are trying to discuss a lot of topics around sustainability, as well as try to tell you how you can actually start following a sustainable lifestyle and introduce you to some amazing brands who are part of our little green kampung that are putting in efforts in order to change the status quo, because the truth is the status quo is definitely not working. We have a planet with limited resources, but our needs and demands seem to be unlimited, and we can't keep exploiting it. So that's the inspiration behind the Green Collective. We have a retail store at Funa, so do visit it. You can also go online to our website to check out a lot of products which are sustainable and which you can use in your everyday lifestyle. So that was a brief introduction to people who are joining us for the first time. We want to spend most of this time talking to Avi and Fred, talking about their projects, talking about the struggles, and talking about how they see people in 2050 consuming food, which we all need to. Unlike fashion, sometimes I feel that. So, so yeah. I mean, on that note, I guess Avi, maybe you want to start and tell us a bit more about your work, the inspiration behind it, how it all started, and yeah, the floor is completely yours.
Thanks, Mayur, for having us. Hi, everyone. My name is Avi, and I am the co-founder at LVL. That's spelled LVL, sometimes confused by many, but yeah, it stands for level. What we do is we do a line of highly nutritious plant-based superfood powders. I'll share a little story of the motivations behind starting a line of organic superfoods. So when I was younger, as my mom used to prepare our meals at home, a typical plate, I mean, she wasn't very healthy either at the time, but she was also going through a health transformation and adapting her diet to a much healthier diet. And as a result, we kind of suffered or benefited from it, depends how you look at it. But a typical dish would look like we'd have white rice, we'd have maybe fried chicken and very little vegetables on our plate. But there was a period of time where the plate started to morph. The white rice turned brown and fried chicken turned into grilled chicken. And then I started to notice more and more veggies on my plate. And over the span of, I guess, a couple of years, I noticed that I was eating a very healthy diet. And I mean, I looked back and I thought the only way that I could have gone from eating a not so good diet to a much better diet now was because my mom was almost sneaky in that way by making small incremental switches to the plate. So, one day she'd switch out the rice to brown rice. Another day she'd switch out the fried chicken to grilled chicken. And I found that a very sustainable approach to improving your diet. And that experience as a whole is something that I wanted to share with everyone. Improving your health and improving your diet by taking very small steps. So I thought about how we could do this, and I chanced upon superfood powders. And the beauty about superfood powders is that they're very versatile, they're very highly nutritious. You can put them, you can sprinkle them over your salad, you can incorporate them into your juice or your smoothies, and you can begin to take small steps towards improving your diet. And we like to say leveling up your diet. That's kind of where the name came from as well. I think that was the first motivation. The second motivation was as I dug more into superfoods, I noticed that there were so many superfoods out there, and I know this is a term that's quite loosely used, but there are certain exotic foods that are native to, especially here in Asia, that just don't get enough attention and awareness. Of course, things like chia seeds and cacao powder have been commercialized and everyone knows about them, but things like baobab and moringa are much lesser known. And one of my objectives was to bring that to the forefront and raise awareness about these plant-based superfoods that exist and could potentially benefit you in so many different ways. Yeah, so that's kind of the story of Level.
I mean, I'm going to stop you right there. Actually, that's a very interesting point that you raised about superfoods, right? The awareness related to superfoods, because it's one of those things that came into the picture, became a hype, so that if you are out in a discussion group, you feel a bit embarrassed asking about what is exactly a superfood. What is so
Yeah.
super about a superfood? Do you want to talk a bit more about that for the audience?
Yeah, okay. I mean, let's debunk some of the myths around superfoods. So superfoods are essentially foods that, if you look at it on a per gram basis, they're extremely highly nutritious. So I'll take the example of our moringa powder, for example, is if you, in order to benefit from moringa, you can't be expected to eat tons and tons of moringa leaves. So what we're able to do is we take the ratio is 7 kilograms of moringa powder equals to 1 kilogram of, let me start again. 7 kilograms of moringa leaves is equal to 1 kilo of moringa powder. So you're able to get all of the benefits of 7 kilos of leaves in just a small amount of powder, and that's kind of what we use to define superfoods. It's on a per gram basis. It's extremely nutritious. On a per gram basis, moringa powder, has 7 times the iron of spinach, and tons and tons of vitamin C and potassium compared to oranges and bananas and the likes. So yeah, it's down to the per gram basis. What is the nutritional value of that food? And that's kind of what defines it as being a superfood.
Okay, I mean, that is very interesting. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. And it's amazing that how these ancient things have actually been hidden but not been explored and unlocked. So great to hear that. From food, let's move to wine, because they need to be paired properly. That's why the session is paired in that way. Fred, I recently had a long detailed chat with you about how is Javelina sustainable, and I was blown away because I think everything you told me I was unaware of. So I want you to do the same for everyone else on this call. Please
okay, but shorter, right? I think our conversation was over an hour.
Oh yes.
Yeah, but so I mean, first thing I want to say thank you, Avi, for also I'm learning about your brand, and it's I realized while you were talking, it's interesting to sort of see, how you got to where you were, and I think one message I was thinking when you were talking about that was, there are many ways, many avenues for people to learn about or get into this world of sustainability, and there's many different aspects. Mine was very much a career-based thing. I was working in a tech-based world, and all of a sudden that world ended. I'd been in there over around 15 years, and I decided I wanted to do something completely different. And I started researching, and also I wanted to get into something that I was more like a product I consume myself, something that had, in my previous world, the back end was like programmers in offices, and I was like, I'd rather be in the farmland somewhere in the countryside, buying something lovely, so that it started with that. But I took the application of everything that I learned doing sort of a tech startup and raising money and everything, and it becomes very much like, what is the purpose and how can you prove it with data and everything? And what I sort of found was I got into the wine was one of the things I looked at. And what I found was this world which is steeped in a tradition, just saying that you must, like the wine must come in a bottle. There's like no other way. And I started researching and sustainability, new types of packaging, and obviously the biggest challenge I think that we have on the planet and the globe today is the global warming, the fight against CO2. There's many others. I'm not trying to take the position where this is like the one and the only one to consider, but in this particular world, I started doing the research, and of a glass bottle, 68% of the total CO2 a glass bottle produces, 68% comes from the glass bottle. Everything added up together, the rest of it is the remaining 32%. Of all wine, like grape growing and wine production, that only makes up 15 to 17% of the CO2 that's produced. So clearly, when you look at it, the one single thing that you can do to reduce, to do the biggest sort of reduction of wine, CO2, negative CO2 emissions out of, or unnecessary CO2 emissions out of the wine industry, is to replace the bottle. And then I kind of like hit this complete wall of like, it's impossible, right? Like, you can't do it. No one will accept it. And that's sort of the idiot that I am, the kind of challenge that I like. And I started to sort of build this complete logical application that not only is that the benefit, and if you compare to our packaging that we have, that in the entire lifespan, from sourcing of raw materials to the production of the packaging, to the distribution of the packaging to the filling, to the distribution to the consumer, to the use of the consumer, to the end of life, and to whatever end of life solution you use, our packaging is 80% more efficient, or should I say, has 80% less negative impact on the environment than a glass bottle. And if you speak to anybody from a sort of sustainability perspective, it's a no-brainer. It's a complete, utter no-brainer. But if you then apply that to tradition and perception, which we were talking a little bit like challenges is one question that we have. So maybe I'm jumping forward here a bit, but it becomes like the main thing. So the start of it is that just to do the research and really look at your industry holistically from absolutely the beginning. And there's so much of this which is empirical. You can measure all of it, right? And there are people who have. And all I did was go on the internet and find life cycle assessment documents that have done this, and then start adding the bits together. And now, instead of saying, as a brand, and why we're in the Green Collective, for example, is I don't want to go and present this against wine traditionalists. There's no point, right? So I want to find a new wine consumer where, as we put it, if you are sustainable, the packaging is equally as important as the product, as the product is delivered in terms of sustainability. You have to consider them both. And I think there's a market for that. And I'm not going through traditional routes, which is hard and difficult, but that's a little bit where we are. And I think that's the sort of application and the thinking that you have to think holistically. There's a lot of, everything can be measured and measure it. And for me, it's a no-brainer. I'm also sorry, not saying it's not the ultimate solution. And I believe looking forward, I'm already tied into looking at what are new materials, what are new recycling methods that are coming, and then applying to that. So constantly getting to the best position we can today at, as Avi and I discussed earlier, at a price point that a little startup can afford, but with a vision to the future, knowing you can improve moving forward.
Thanks a lot, Fred. I think one of the most interesting parts that I liked about Havalina was kind of debunking the myth around thinking of glass as the best material possible.
Yeah.
And I think I would love if you talk to me, because you explained it to me how sandblasting and other things are done.
Oh yeah.
I guess it will be great for you to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing to think about, sorry, when we're talking about the best material, is that glass is the only material for one particular thing, and that's the aging of wine, because it doesn't affect the liquid in any way, and you can have it there for 50 years and it's fine. So I'm not saying, like, it does have a role and a purpose, but sand mining is basically one of the biggest. So of a glass bottle, 70% of it is silicon, or which is majority made sand, basically. And it's basically the biggest environmental disaster you've never heard of. And so there is a lot of sand in the desert, but you can't use that because the sand corns are very rounded and smooth. So you can't produce glass or good glass. So the only place where you can find the sand that you need are riverbeds and sort of beach shorelines. And the best are riverbeds. And the way that they get that sand is they take these big boats, big barges. They have these enormous vacuums, and they just go along the riverbed or the beachfront, and they just suck up everything from the river. It destroys like all the life down there, and it affects the even on land. The sort of growth and plants and trees and everything. And they're saying like it's something by in 100 years. California will have pretty much lost all of its beaches, right? If you're measuring sort of how you're doing. So there's these elements where a material is considered sort of just lovely because if you put it back in nature over 1 million years or 500,000 years, whatever it is, it will dissolve back into nature. And there's an element of truth to that. But I think we have to balance it with what does it take to get there, and so going back to the concept of wine, any wine so the stats I just got is 80 to 90% of wine produced is not stored for aging, goes immediately to market, and 85% of that wine is consumed within a few weeks of purchase. So basically it's a $350 billion market. In Australia alone, domestically, it's $3 billion in one country. Domestic only, $6 billion export. Of that, 90% is basically immediate consumption. And you do not need a bottle for that. It does not affect, it doesn't change the taste, it doesn't do anything. So I'm trying to take like that thinking and going, let's take the material and let's use a material, and everything has a negative production side and a negative story. But if we need to age it, fine, glass is the material. But for 90% of the market, it just adds no value whatsoever. So I think that's that bit, I think, where instead of just going with tradition and doing whatever, it's like dig up the data, do the research, or people around do it for everyone else. But I think as consumers, take it to hand. It's a fact,
Perfect. That's very, very interesting. And actually the part that you talk about, like basically don't always believe in the status quo. And you talk about tradition, and at that word, I'm going to turn to Avi, because a lot of the superfoods are actually, and if we look at Asia, and if we go back to a lot of traditional cooking and a lot of traditional use of what we call superfoods, actually a lot of your concept of level is around that. But as you go about educating the consumer about the benefits, as you go about running a business and being an entrepreneur, what are some of the biggest barriers you've had trying to convince people, trying to build it as a brand?
I mean, one of the major barriers to sustainability we face is, of course, that there's a lack of local production of food. Okay, so as many of you already know, 90% of the food here in Singapore is imported, and not only is that a liability, but because what happens if the supply chain is cut for some reason, or there's some issues like we've seen now with the recent hit of COVID as well. But there is a CO2 emission element involved with getting that food here as well. So, this is one of the major challenges we have in terms of being sustainable. But we've also seen that Singapore is pushing for a lot of local agriculture, in terms of vertical farms. There's been a big push and support from the government to build lots of vertical farms here to increase the production over here. It'd be interesting for us if we could partner with some of these vertical farms to start growing some local moringa, for example. I mean, moringa is a very versatile crop to grow. It grows in any condition. So that would be really interesting. And I think the other major challenge to being sustainable as a brand is that um, these, in terms of packaging, like 100% compostable packaging is still at very nascent stages of innovation. So of course, for our products, we require packaging that is 100% impermeable. So you can't have any oxygen penetrate the packaging, because it begins to oxidize the powder, and it begins to lose its color and its nutritional value. So, uh, there are some solutions out there that I've seen already, but as an SME, it's sometimes those are a bit difficult to afford from the get-go. But it's something that we have to build towards and aim for and work towards. And currently, in order to be sustainable, some of that cost has to be passed on to the consumer. And it is encouraging to see that more and more consumers are willing to pay that premium for brands that are being more sustainable. But there are some people who definitely lose out as well. And it's a cycle that we're going to have to keep improving on.
Can I ask something there?
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, I actually today, funnily enough, bought my first Singapore grown cherry tomatoes from cold storage. I'd never seen anything. What have they estimated? How much of the 100%, 90% are right now is imported? How much can they grow in Singapore? I mean, if they went all out and went, because I'm saying also, like, I'm Swedish, lived in the UK and places where there's a lot of like local markets and whatever, there's totally different landscape, but you kind of get into this idea of buying local. And I think fresh stuff or something local would be fantastic. Do they have any estimates on that, or?
I mean, we have to see how. I mean, it all comes to in Singapore, it's about how can we merge this urban environment with an agricultural production environment. So obviously we have to build vertically because the lack of land space over here. We're seeing. I mean, even if it's vertical, you do need a starting point. So you need somewhere to begin that vertical growth. So we're seeing some being built on top of HDB blocks, other buildings. Of course, there are some facilities that are dedicated from the ground up to vertical farming, and I think the cherry tomatoes that you bought are from a local company that does that, and I've actually been there. It's fantastic what they're doing. But I think as time passes along, I think the government's going to have to also see where they can sneak in these vertical farms and cooperate with home dwellers and real estate developers in order to bring this to life, pun intended.
Yeah, but Fred, that's an interesting point, because basically, Singapore is so uniquely placed, and I remember when I moved here around 6-7 years back now, and I was doing consulting with the government a lot. So every country's GDP gets divided into agriculture, manufacturing, and services. Singapore's gets divided into manufacturing, services, and construction.
Yeah.
So agriculture just does not exist, right?
Yeah, I know.
But I think there is a huge movement to grow. So like NEA actually gives you seeds for free to grow in a kitchen garden at your home. So there is a huge movement. On the vertical farming side, because my background just before this was I worked in an agri firm in Malaysia, where vertical farming was much more commercially feasible. Because whatever said and done, if you have a vertical farm in Singapore, it has a real estate value. So I think what Avis talking about, like what Edible Garden City is trying to do, basically, they're working with a mission of creating rooftop garden of Singapore, which will be basically growing a lot of stuff. But vertical farming also has limits in terms of what can grow. So it's a lot of leafy vegetables. They also try to integrate it a bit with aquaculture so that they can actually make it commercially feasible. So there's a lot happening there, but the scale is, of course, pretty small.
Yeah, it's probably not possible to feed all of Singapore.
That would be, I think, but yeah, I mean, going back to the point that you raised, I think one of the challenges of doing any kind of food things in Singapore or any kind of sustainable products is that you have to look at the CO2 footprint.
Yeah.
But the way somehow, or I don't know if it's the right way of looking at it, but the way you look at sustainable product consumption is what is the next best alternative.
Yeah.
And the thing is that is common to both.
Yeah.
So whether it's a product in fair price right in front of you with a shelf which is not sustainable versus a sustainable product, that part is going to be the same.
Yeah. One thing I've also just on the sustainability side is I just happen to have a cold storage, happens to be the nearest store to me, and I don't really like it. But if you look at the organic section as well, in terms of the pricing of, for example, vegetables is absolutely insane. I mean, sometimes they're 3 times as much. And when I speak to example, our next wine producer from Italy, it's a second generation family, and they're converting to sustainable and will be all organic. I think they're now 30%, and our next Pinot Grigio will be organic. And he says that there's a cost in conversion, but after conversion, there's no difference for them to be organic. And I'm just wondering this about pricing, where people, even the producers and maybe they're bigger producers who are sort of leveraging the term of sort of sustainability and organic to kind of cash in. And I think it's the wrong strategy, because we need it to be ubiquitous in that way, right? And I understand that there's maybe a curve or something, but of what I've seen of organic foods, for example, it's crazy, the prices here.
Okay, but Avi, if you have an opinion, please jump in here. But I would assume with organic, the yield is also much lower, right?
Yeah.
Because you are not, so it could not be only a factor of capex related issue wherein your setup requires a cost, but overall your yield is actually lower for the same hectare. So that also impacts. But Avi, you will have more experience.
Yield is definitely lower, and the other component is actually obtaining that organic certification. In the case of USDA organic certification, for example, it can be very, very expensive, especially for small-time producers in developing countries. A lot of the time, they're actually using very sustainable and organic practice in terms of producing their crop, but they just simply can't afford to get the organic certification, the USDA organic certification, and so there's not enough awareness created.
I think this family are saying that the process for them to be registered organic is something like 7 years or something. The whole process they can afford to do it, but even doing it, the process for them converting is like a long one. So it's a big investment, no matter how.
Exactly. So that's to do with legislation, because they may be organic, but simply because they don't have the certification, they're not seen as actually being authentically organic, and it's a pity.
Fred, we're getting questions on Facebook, and this one's for you.
Okay.
Because we talked about glass bottles. So Muriel is asking, I reuse my glass bottles and containers for water, kefir, etc. What's wrong in it?
No, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just I'm thinking more. That's fantastic and well done. And for example, I have 2 bottles as candle holders, but it's just the majority don't. I'm thinking when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking of this global market, or even if you think this regional market, or even Singapore. It's a great practice. If you think of wine and the average wine consumer, they might consume at least 1 bottle a week, let's say. And if you're thinking more, maybe European culture and Australian or expats maybe who live here will consume more than that. And it's just maybe not feasible. After a couple of weeks, if you're reusing, you'll have 50 bottles at home. So no, absolutely that there's a reuse. And for example, for me, one thing that I have is, again, I was trying not to be anti-glass, but anti sort of glass as a single-use material. So I have a carafe, and I love it. And it means so in our pouches, as you pour out, no oxygen goes into the pouch. So the wine will stay fresh for several weeks. When in a bottle, you just put the cap on, there's oxygen, it'll be destroyed, be oxidized, and be gone in 2-3 days. So for with the use of glass, if I have 1.5 liters of wine in our pouches, I can go, well, I just want 2 glasses of wine for dinner tonight. Squirt a little bit in a glass, container. It looks lovely. It feels lovely. I love the material of glass. And I have it at the dinner table, and it's perfect. And then I have one carafe. I reuse it over and over and over and over again. But the method of getting the wine to me is considerably less harmful by 80% to overall in every aspect. CO2, air acidification, soil, water, than a bottle. So absolutely, answer is absolutely nothing wrong with buying glass and reusing it. I think if we just take wine, for example, and a weekly, should we say, wine consumer, you'll end up with, maybe 5 to 10 bottles a month. After a year, it's not sustainable in that way, I think. So for me, it makes more sense than to have a really sustainable way that has many other benefits. Like I've thrown our pouches for my first or second floor flat onto the road, and it didn't break. And you can carry it if you go into a barbecue pit, whatever you haven't drunk, you take back home. There's a lot of benefits if you think past the glass bottle for wine, but then definitely have glass at home, which is your reusing and this experience and everything like that. I love the material. It's fantastic. It's just trying to optimize the material for the use and the need. For example, when it comes to wine and the producing the product that you want, after a sort of 2-3 year period, you have to go for glass. There's, if that's your goal to age the wine, there's no other option. So I think it's a more an aspect of that. So maybe an example would also be food. And how can you get food into your home, or deliver food in terms of weight and everything like that? Should you have a glass jar full of seeds or beads or whatever, but then at home you can put it into whatever you want to serve and that.
And Fred, we have one more question for you, which is basically from Esther, and she's asking, isn't the wine pouch made out of mylar, which can't be recycled? Maybe you could talk a bit more about the material.
Yeah, sure. It's actually 3 layers of PET, 1 layer of aluminium. The tap is 100% recyclable. That can just go in any sort of recycling. So Javi and I we were having a chat before, and the approach that I've decided to take is that I can't solve every aspect in the first hit. So by taking this approach in this packaging, I can beat, if you will, for this 90% of wine that's produced, I can quote unquote beat bottles in terms of sustainability and wastage, hands down, by 90%. The one thing that that glass has over our packaging is today's, should we say, government, or what do you call it, municipal recycling capabilities will not recycle our pouches. I know. So what are we doing about that? Well, we do have, if you order wine from our website, we'll deliver home, and then you keep the empties. If you order the next time, you can give the empties to the delivery guy. We collect them. I'm working with another Green Collective brand called Stylecat, and they have weavers local weavers in the Philippines, and they've designed a fantastic tote bag using our pouches. So the idea is to, whatever we can collect to upcycle into other products. So that sort of lives on, hopefully, for a very long time. And the other is, I've actually used our packaging to work with labs who are working on the next generation of recycling. So on that portion of recycling, I'm afraid I'll have to ask everyone to be a little bit patient in the fact that there are new recycling capabilities that are coming. For example, there was one that converted our packaging to aerogel. Aerogel can be used for it's hyper absorbent material. It can be used to absorb oil spills. It can used for insulation in houses. There's an Australian company. Unfortunately, I can't be using them. They basically take plastic products that aren't recyclable, crush them, and turn them into fence posts, and they sell them back to, in this case, the wine industry. So that would be a perfect little story for us. I have worked with an Australian company called PVC Separation. It's early stage test, and they have then separated our pouches. The problem with our pouches is not that each material can't be recycled. It's that they're laminated together, and that's what makes the packaging so strong, and that air can't get through. And so the integrity of the product will be kept for much, much longer. But they have a technology to separate the layers. And so we have the PET in one pile, aluminum in the other. And there's, again, an Australian company, or it's a global company, but they have a factory in Australia that can take this recycled flakes, if you will, PET flakes, and they use it to make labels. And they make labels for everything, when they also make labels for the wine market. So in our little way, I haven't solved that piece yet. So hands up, I understand that. I understand it's an emotional thing. But as I said, I can't solve everything, especially on my little budget. I can't solve every problem straight out the gate. So I think simply by taking the course that we have, we've solved the clear majority of problems in terms of sustainability. I think we've added functionality, which is portable, it won't break, it's not as heavy when you're carrying it home. No oxygen comes in, so it keeps the wine fresh, that's less wastage and all that. But I completely recognize that we have the end of life aspect to figure out. So the message is we're working on it.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Fred.
Today, and we're working on it.
Yep, and I think it's for everyone on the call and on Facebook. Like for individuals, sustainability is a journey towards zero waste. So it is for us as brands and as people trying to build sustainable brands. Because if you try to solve too many problems at a time, either you have a lot of money, that's why you're doing it, or you're basically doing research.
Yeah, and I think also tackle, for your industry, tackle the really big problems first. And the biggest problem, if we look at all of sustainability or all of the negative impact of the environment in the wine world, is CO2 emissions, and that it's in the packaging. And that's the issue. That's the big one.
No, thanks a lot for that, Fred, because I think these are very valid questions, and we're very happy that we're able to answer these questions in these sessions. I'm looking at the time, so I'm also conscious, and I think let's start wrapping it up. And Avi, I'll come back to you on this. And you've been running Level for some time now. How have you seen the consumer perception change? What are the questions? Do you see the questions are evolving in terms of your products, their approach, how to use them? How have you seen it evolving in Singapore?
Okay, yeah, and it's a great question. And one of the things we've definitely noticed, and I mean, this is super encouraging, but consumers they're looking for and they're demanding a lot more information these days than they were before. So when they are, and this is just proof of conscious consumption, right? When they're buying something, they want to know everything about it before they make their purchase. And we're experiencing this firsthand as well, right? So we get more and more questions like, is this natural? Is it processed in a lab? Consumers are looking closer at the labels. They're looking closer at the ingredients. And we even get more and more questions, through Facebook and our other channels. Where are these ingredients sourced from? Are they sourced from fair trade? Are they sourced from mass manufacturers? Are they sourced from small farmers? And so it just goes to show that people are taking a much more keen interest in the sustainability and the impact of products and services before they are actually purchasing them. So it's it's super reassuring for us.
And that's great to hear, Avi, because I mean that's what we kind of kept hoping for the longest time when we were building sustainable brands.
Yeah.
In Singapore, no one was asking for it actually. So it's and I think we've seen that even at Green Collective, we've seen the change in sustainable behavior of the consumer and moving, and there's certain level of maturity coming in. I will pass the same question to Fred, but as I do that, Payfan, I'll request you to launch a poll. And for audiences, just to give us some feedback in terms of how do you like the session. So Payfan, if you could just launch the poll, and while Fred answers the question, you can actually participate in the poll.
Yeah. So what have I seen in the sort of reactions of consumers, and what do I expect? There's sort of two-sided. I think there's a lot of interest. They're like, wow, what is this? And actually a lot of people when let's say I'm at an event or something, and or even at the Green Collective, and they come and they really don't know what it is. Is it coffee? Is it like, so that's difficult as well. There's such an ingrained perception that wine is, or any kind of wine you want to buy is only in a bottle. So there is that. But once that realization or hurdle has been jumped, and they start to understand the benefits of it and 80% less CO2 or whatever, they think it's really cool. And I think it's that positive thing where I believe really that there is this sort of generation moving along, coming along, that are just into something new and different. They're ready for it, right? It's that not status quo, and positive messages are received well, and I think maybe there was a time. I mean, I even take an example as my dad. My dad lives here in Singapore. He's sort of 78, and like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, he wouldn't have thought. I don't think I mean, he loves nature and everything. He wouldn't care. Now he's reading in the paper like every day about sustainability. There's all about recycling in Singapore. And now it really, I've noticed it, he's 78, and I've noticed it's affected his decision-making, which I think is great. And if we can affect the 78-year-old, I think we can certainly affect anybody, really. Old dogs and all that, but I'm really positive about the younger generation, because I think they're open to it. And I think we need to figure out in each segment, what are the arguments and what are the types of products. Avi and I were talking about that. Not only as small, budding entrepreneurs and sustainable companies and brands, not only do we have to create a fantastic product that or solves sustainability problems, we also have to create something in a way that the consumer wants, and it's not easy if you don't have the sustainability challenge, right? So it's kind of double the challenge in a way. But I really do believe that there's a sense that people are into it. They like it, and they'll change their habits if there's a reason, if there's a impact, if they can see an impact, which is a bit of our job as well, to make sure that, there is an impact,
No, definitely. And I think that's where communication of the impact and how it's created, Fred, Navi, I think, but is so essential now in the next phase, so that you can always convince a lot of naysayers. And honestly, the naysayers had some right reasons for being the naysayers, that it does not matter. But I think that was a great note to wrap it up. We've just gone 2 minutes over time. But thank you, Avi. Thank you, Fred, for sparing time. This was great. I think a great discussion around a topic which is so relevant in our times. And I think it's going to be talked about much, much more. So, and that's great to see the confidence that you guys have. So thanks for joining us, and thanks to everyone else on Facebook or on the Zoom session for joining us for this session. We do this every Thursday, and we try to bring in different brands, different perspective. And next week, we'll be talking about eating right, and we will have demonstrations on eating healthy and sustainability, and sustainably through some of our in-house brands. And I can see Level is back, so you will most probably see Avi or someone from his team back here. So do join us, check out our PTEX page. That's where all our events are. And have a great rest of the evening, guys. So thanks a lot for joining. Cheers.
Thanks, Mayur, for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much.